Hey everyone, today we are joined by one of the brightest stars in the National Wrestling Alliance and the independent wrestling scene. You can see him weekly on programs such as NWA Powerrr, NWA USA. He's also appeared for Wildcat Pro Wrestling and Impact Wrestling. He's big, he's strong, he's Mims. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Hey, how you doing, man?
I'm doing really well, and I'm really glad to talk to you because so far the show we've had people who have been on the scene for a long time, right? We've had Sal Renaro, and he's been since the mid '90s is when he first started hanging around wrestling. So he's been around for a long time.
Oh,
And then we had Joe Galli and Johnny LaQuasto, and they've been around for over 10 years now. So
oh man.
what's exciting is this is going to be a different take, and what we love about this, what we're trying to do with the channel is spread wrestling positivity and let people tell their stories. And
Yeah.
everybody has different kinds of stories, and it's going to be fun to hear from a person who you haven't even reached your prime yet. Like you're doing so well, but you're still not even close. Like you have so much ahead of you, and to me,
Yeah.
that's exciting.
I mean, I hope I have a lot out of me. I mean, I haven't been doing this for super long, so.
I think you do. I think you do. But before we jump into all the questions, let's just do some plugs right away. Where can people check you out, and what do you want people to see?
Well, if anything, like, I have a little TikTok. I have a little TikTok, so that's kind of out there right now. I think it should be under the same name as all my social medias. So usually, all my social media is gonna be under like really underscore Mims. Um, that's usually the easiest way to find any of my stuff. I think it's probably like Mims, Big Strong Mims NWA, something like that. Yeah, that's probably what my TikTok's under. And then obviously my Instagram, really underscore Mims. Even my gamer tag, my Xbox Live gamer tag. I love playing with people, really underscore Mims, because it's really Mims. Some people think that's not my last name. They think that's not my real name. I love the fact that out of a lot of people that are on any pro wrestling rosters, especially a lot of the major companies, I'm one of the very small handful of people that actually go under their real name. So that's what I wanted to have on my handles is basically say, oh, yeah, this is really Mims. This is really that guy.
Yeah, that's super cool. And of course, we will have in the description of each individual video a link to your social media so people can check those out and follow you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, cool. And again, thank you for doing this. But let's just get started because I like to start from the very beginning. Do you
Mhm.
remember when you first started watching pro wrestling? What your initial thoughts on it? What made you a fan?
Yeah, actually, the first time I actually saw pro wrestling, I was kind of just flipping around channels. I was a very small kid at the time, and I think the first two people that I saw in a ring together were, if I'm not mistaken, Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect on an episode of WWF television. And so after that, just seeing a little bit of them moving around, I was like, huh, what's this? What's going on here? And I didn't actually get to see it again until a few years later. I was flipping channels, and I think I would catch it here and there, but I'd always catch a couple butt whoopings from my mom because she was not a big fan of wrestling. And funny enough, and I've told the story a little bit here and there, but I'm going to add a little bit to the story. So when it came to pro wrestling, I found out that my mom wasn't a big fan of it during the Attitude Era because I guess she had saw some of the more risque stuff, and so she was like, "Yeah, my kid's not watching this."
That'll do it. That'll do it.
But I found out later from her, and she actually found this out by watching NWA television. Once I got on the show, she saw that Austin Idol was there. That's the first person she pointed out. She was like, "Oh, I know exactly who that guy is." And so I was like, how do you know who Austin Idol is? Because I thought she hated pro wrestling. That's how it seemed. No, she actually used to attend some of the shows over here in the Tennessee area. So she's not from here, but she was kind of raised here. Like my aunts and uncles, and obviously my mother, they were raised here. They had their teenage years here in Tennessee, mostly in Clarksville, Tennessee. So sometimes she would go to the shows in Nashville, the ones that run by Jerry Jarrett. So the Jarrett family were running them. So she's seen some of the shows there. She's even traveled to Memphis and seen some of the shows where Austin Idol was there or Jerry the King Lawler because she can point these guys out pretty easily. So, and then she even gave me a whole like 30-minute speech about Jackie Fargo and how great the Fargo strut was. And she actually went and demonstrated it for me. And I was like, this is kind of weird that you're able to tell me all this now about like, I think I was about like 2 to 3 years in this pro wrestling thing. So about like 2 years ago. She tells me all this, and I'm thinking I have the idea in my head. She absolutely hates wrestling. Then to come to find out, she's a big fan of it. Just once that attitude era hit, she kind of just cut out of it.
That's super cool though. The fact that I in some of the interviews we do talk about closet fans, which this isn't
Mhm.
quite the same situation. He was just a former fan, but you always have those fans who are like, oh yeah, I used to watch, but I don't like that stuff anymore. And then they'll be like, so what did the Miz do on Raw? Why did he do that? And then you're like, oh, okay, yep, yep, yep.
Oh yeah, and like with this, I kind of feel like it's one of my responsibilities now to bring her back into wrestling. But I guess because of me, so she does at least watch the show. She watches what I do, and then she's still got to keep her eye on Austin Idol because I remember the main thing she said about him when she went on her whole tirade about Austin Idol is that he's one of the guys that she hated the most. He was the most dastardly heel around. She hated that guy whenever she was growing up because again, you still had your kayfabe, so
Hmm.
everybody was keeping that closely guarded and keep it to the chest. So she had every reason to hate Austin Idol, I guess.
And how fitting
Um,
is it? And then we'll get to it, but how fitting is it that you've worked with him so much and people in his group in the NWA? That's great.
yeah, it is. It's a little bit serendipitous because I had no idea until around the time we were all working together when I was having the beginnings, the seeds being sown of my feud with Tyrus and obviously Austin Idol's Idolmania Sports Management in conjunction with Church's Money. Don't let me leave out Black G's there. But yeah, no, it was a little bit serendipitous. So she was just like, "Oh yeah, I know that guy right there. I can't believe he's working against my son right now. I can't believe this." Uh, and that's the funny thing. So I'm gonna dip into something else a little bit. The funny thing was, right when that started to happen, and my mom kind of brought that up, not too long right afterwards, my dad kind of threw his hat in the ring. My dad was a little bit of a wrestling fan back in the day. Even up during my favorite era of pro wrestling, my favorite era of pro wrestling is the Ruthless Aggression era. Whenever I watch any matches, when I study matches, it's usually either from the New Generation era or from the Ruthless Aggression era.
Two great eras,
So
underrated periods.
very much, especially the New Generation era. There was a lot of great matches there. I understand people like, they try to, diss it a little bit with the gimmicks and some of the things that I guess weren't catching on where wrestling wasn't as popular for some people before you get right to the Attitude Era. And in comparison, I guess obviously the Attitude Era looks way better than the New Generation era, but a lot of my favorite matches to watch and to learn from and take a little bits and pieces from stuff. A lot of those were during the New Generation era, and then obviously the Ruthless Aggression era. That was mainly where I was
Yeah,
watching. So as a fan, I was there. I was very much in tune. But with the feud that I had with Idolmania Sports Management, my dad actually ended up seeing a couple of the matches, and so my dad had no idea that Tyrus was actually a pro wrestler. Had been watching him for years, had been loving everything he was putting out. My dad is a very, very big Tyrus fan, and he had no idea once Tyrus rocked out that this is the guy that was fighting. He thought whenever I said Tyrus, I was talking about somebody completely different. No, it's exactly the same guy, one and the same. And my dad is obviously got to be conflicted because he absolutely loves Tyrus, and then you got to be biased because I'm your son, I'm your big strong son. You gotta love me first before you love Tyrus.
you gotta.
You gotta, and funny enough, I don't know if he's gonna see this podcast too soon, so maybe I should hold this to my chest a little bit. But for his birthday this year, I actually ended up getting him a Tyrus themed gift. Much to my chagrin, I still have to make the old man happy, so I'm gonna get him a Tyrus themed present for his
That's
birthday.
that's absolutely incredible, though.
Yeah. I still try to be nice, even though obviously we have our beef between Big Strong Mims, myself, and Idolmania Sports Management and the Church's Money Enterprises. Obviously, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of them. Why should I be?
That's
Yeah,
Tyrus and Austin Idol for you, tearing families apart or trying to.
absolutely. Tearing families apart. My dad's obviously on the dark side right now. At least my mom's by my side.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a kid, who were some of your favorites in the New Generation, Attitude Era, Ruthless Aggression? Like, were you a big fan of the SmackDown 6 at the time? Was that something you were paying attention to?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, that's when I got to watch the Ruthless Aggression era, where I learned to kind of like hide what I was watching and get away with it because, like I said, my mom was not a big fan of wrestling at all. Anytime she saw it, it was automatically a butt whooping, and I was out of there. Um, but my favorite wrestlers from the Ruthless Aggression era obviously got to be the SmackDown Six. A lot of the biggest matches that I remember were coming from the SmackDown Six, and I mean, people kind of they kind of reference the SmackDown Six a little bit like Spider-Man Sinister Six, where you kind of just trade people in and out of there. So some people were like, "Oh, well, Edge and Rey Mysterio are clearly in it." Well, you know, you got your Eddie Guerreros, you got your Los Guerreros, you got your World's Greatest Tag Team, and then they try to throw in a Chris Benoit or Booker T, and I'm like, we got to narrow this down to one specific SmackDown six instead of just taking six guys. And it was and I think that's a great thing about that era of professional wrestling because there were so many stars from the top to the bottom on the low card, on the mid card, and on the upper card. There were so many stars. Everybody had something that they loved and that they liked on the show. You sat around, you watched the show for everybody. It was never just a oh we're only coming in to see the main event, or we're only coming in to see the guys on the lower end of the card. We're only coming in to see the cruiserweights. No, we're coming in to see everybody, especially with SmackDown at the time. It was one of the hottest shows for a reason.
Yeah.
There was everything was must see.
Yeah,
So
I was 31 then, so I like that's or I'm 31 now, excuse me. I wasn't 31 then.
yeah,
I'm 31 now, so that was like the prime of my fandom because obviously I love the new generation and the Attitude Era, but a lot
mhm,
of it went past me because I was still relatively young even when I was watching it, you know.
mhm.
But the Ruthless Aggression era into the next few years, that's when I was really the most hooked probably ever, just because that was the prime age.
Oh yeah, I was definitely very hooked at that same time too. I think I didn't start watching wrestling consistently to where I had a good strategy to make for sure I didn't get in trouble for watching it until the moment that actually caused me to say, you know what, I want to be a professional wrestler. Because, you know, at some point everybody sees professional wrestling and they say they want to do this. And everybody has that moment where they're like, oh, this is the thing I saw. And I was like, yeah, I wanted to be just like that, or live the boyhood dream, like they say. You know, I think a lot of kids in the generation before me kind of pointed to Shawn Michaels winning the world championship for the first time. Uh,
Absolutely.
but me, since I'm a little bit younger, obviously I'm about 30 years old now. My moment was actually seeing Triple H return from the Quad Tear. So it was seeing that reaction because I had
What a moment.
idea, no idea who anybody was. Had no idea who Triple H was, whether he was a good guy or a bad guy. I just see him come out, and it's this big affair. The entire crowd, they're getting tons of great shots of the crowd. The crowd is going crazy. They're going nuts. You have this guy looking like a total badass just walking out, and everybody's up on their feet for him. And I'm like, I've got to be just like this guy. I've got to cause this kind of reaction, this kind of emotional reaction. I've got to do that same thing. I've got to be able to give people this moment. I'm thinking, what did this guy do to have these people this crazy for him? To have these people this excited? People in the crowd crying, celebrating out of their seats. How do you get that same moment? How do I give that to people? And I was like, I have to dedicate my life to doing that. Now, at that point, I didn't say, hey, we're doing this right now. I didn't even come up with a plan until at least like about a decade later, but still having that image in my head and having that be my first big wrestling moment that I saw was kind of what set me on the path to get to where I am right now, which I thought was fantastic. And that's kind of that goes into, you know, the question you had about who my favorite wrestlers were at the time. You know, going to the Ruthless Aggression era, you have what some people call the Reign of Terror. So I hated all the bad guys. I hated Triple H so much. Hated this guy. Every single time one of my favorite baby faces was getting up to the point where they're going to beat this guy, he's always beating him down. He's got Evolution helping him. He's got Ric Flair helping him. He's got all type of people that are going to help him, or he's going to cheat to win. And I hated this guy. Same thing with JBL. Absolutely hated these guys. These guys were the biggest heels to me. And then you turn into now, or at least until I kind of learned the illusion of kayfabe wasn't really there. And lo and behold, I watched one documentary, and Triple H became my absolutely favorite wrestler. And it's because of exactly what I named off with that first moment. He was able to elicit that emotional response, not just out of me, but out of hundreds of thousands to millions of people. He could elicit that emotional response, whether it's that he wanted you to love him or he wanted you to hate him. And I thought that is something that is so important that I want to be able to do on either side of the ball that I'm playing on, good guy or bad guy. I want to be able to be just like him. And so seeing that this is somebody who's manipulated my emotions so well for a long period of my life, I was like, this is the guy. This is the guy who's my absolute favorite. Above anybody else, this is the guy.
That's super cool, especially, you know, you look back then and even like when you do look at his new generation work when he was Hunter Hearst
Mm.
Helmsley, and then today of where he is in the business, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a huge change. I think I was just telling my girlfriend the other day, doing a little bit of wrestling education, telling her about the incident that kind of broke kayfabe, but also kind of changed the course of his entire career. The whole curtain call incident everybody
Hmm.
likes to talk about. So there's a lot of things that would be very different. Like just I have a fun time trying to think of the reality we would be in if that incident never happened. One, could we say that Triple H's career would have been as great if that never would have happened? Could we
Because
say that it would be on the same path? Could we say that kayfabe would still be the same regardless? Just something else would happen. There's a lot of questions to ask.
I mean, allegedly he was going to win King of the Ring that year, which means Austin wouldn't have won King of the Ring that year. So who knows what that would like? Just that end of the business would have changed maybe completely. Who knows?
Oh yeah, I mean that could have changed the entire outcome of the Attitude Era. In again, in that same conversation I was having about the curtain call incident, as we were talking about the dissolving of kayfabe. And I think I spoke to her at first about the Montreal screw job, which is it's surprising that anybody in this day and age does not know what that is,
Right?
because you've heard it so many times on anything that involves wrestling. Even like the most casual wrestling fan probably knows about the Montreal screw job at this point. And so I was telling her about that and showing her like, okay, that's kind of where like it really actually started to full on dissolve, or kayfabe was kind of out the window whenever you outed Vince McMahon as the actual owner of the company. And so it's this huge twist, like reality and kayfabe blending in together. And then on top of that, you have the curtain call incident. So those two things in conjunction kind of gave us our Attitude Era. That gave us the kind of reality that we live in right now. If it wasn't for these two events happening, and again,
It's crazy. It's crazy.
yeah, it is absolutely crazy. Yeah, and when it came to the new generation era thing that we were talking about before, that's something I had to watch once I got older. Once we got like a WWE Network, to where I can go back and find all this stuff, and obviously YouTube too, and then now Peacock. Finding a lot of Bret Hart's matches because, like I said, he was one of the first people that I saw. Same thing with Kurt Hennig. He was one of the first people I saw. Getting to go back and see some of their matches, getting to watch a lot of the tag matches, uh, either with the British Bulldogs, which I was a really big fan of once I started to get to see more of their stuff, and then and knowing the influence that the British Bulldogs have on some of the people that I'm in the same locker room with, which is great. Obviously with Harry Smith being in the same locker room, and then with Nick Aldis having a big amount of influence from Dynamite Kid and his moveset that you can see. He's actually told me that directly. He's like, yeah, some of my moves here, you see the spot that I do here. This is a Dynamite Kid spot right here. This is
Very
why I do
cool.
it.
Very
And
cool.
then surprisingly, this is not exactly the most popular pick when it comes to tag team wrestling. I guess this is one of those things that you call your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestler, right? Uh, I loved watching the Rougeau brothers in the Killer Bees. Love watching those matches, going up against anybody, especially with I think it was the Killer Bees against the Heart Foundation. Very old match, and that's when I really started my deep dive into a lot of tag team wrestling, especially from the new generation era, and a lot of people that exist around that time.
Do you find yourself more drawn to tag team wrestling, or do you have a healthy appreciation for both?
Well, I found myself more drawn to tag team wrestling when I first started, just because my best friend, he was Migs on NWA television, right? Whenever he came in, Miguel Robles, he actually got me into professional wrestling in the first place. It was kind of just one conversation we had after he had a bad breakup with a girl. And I mean, the fortunate news was that they got back together afterwards. But we kind of made the dedication to do this wrestling thing together. Now, unfortunately, it didn't work out when it came to doing the wrestling thing together at first. Eventually, we found each other again when it came to the world of professional wrestling. Uh, we ended up getting trained in two different places. So he got trained by Lance Storm, the Storm Wrestling Academy, a fantastic academy. And that was originally the plan. Whenever we were talking about, oh, we're going to go get trained together, we're going to be the world's greatest tag team, yada, yada, yada. Unfortunately, I did not take that same path, and I guess it's unfortunately and fortunately,
Yeah,
because if I
things have
did
worked out
take
pretty
that same
well.
path, oh yeah, definitely the connections I've made just by trusting in Crimson and working under him, starting around 2017, about 4 years after we made that whole promise to each other.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get into. I wanted to get into
Yeah.
when did you make the decision to start training officially? Because I know you wanted to ever since the Triple H moment, but when did you start making plans and how did Tried and True Pro Wrestling become where you went? Like, can you just explain what went into that?
Yeah. So me and Miguel had that conversation back in 2013, and that's when I decided, I made a promise to myself that I was going to sacrifice anything and everything for professional wrestling. And unfortunately, and fortunately, there weren't really a lot of opportunities that came across during that time. While Miguel was doing his training in 2015, I was still kind of here, just kind of trying to find my way to set a foundation to even get started because it's very hard to find out how to get started, especially at that time. I wasn't like the best internet surfer at the time,
Mm-hmm.
so I was very bad at finding the answers for exactly what I needed. And getting started was like one of the hardest parts. And so eventually a family friend of mine, he ended up telling me one day, just calling me in the middle of the morning. He's like, "Hey man, uh, one of our guys called out and we need somebody to come in." And that's all he had to say to me. I was like, "Oh, no, give me a second. Let me just make a phone call real quick." Flip over on the other line, go ahead and call my job and tell them I quit. I quit that day just to go work for Crimson. Once I heard there was a spot open, I didn't think they were even going to pay me or whatnot. I did not care as long as I was able to do something that involved professional wrestling because I'd already been watching Tried and True Pro at the live show since 2015, since they had first started. And so by 2017, I was making for sure that I was going to be a part of that in any way, shape, or form, whatever way I possibly could be. And so 2017, March 2017 to be exact, I think it might have been like Art of War 3, something like that. That was the name of it. Jeff Hardy was the headliner. Got to meet him. That was very weird because we met in the bathroom.
Oh.
I did not expect that.
What
Um,
a first meeting.
oh yeah, wasn't expecting to meet the first person that I would grow up watching and being a big fan of. First time I meet him is well, I'm Boba Wiener in my hand trying to take a piss. Didn't expect to meet him like that, and more than that to actually say anything while that's going on. And surprisingly enough, I didn't do the whole fanboy thing and just be like, "Oh my god, you're Jeff Hardy! Please sign my shirt or
Yeah.
something." Uh, Please shake my hand after I watched it, of course, sir.
Of course. Of
Uh,
course.
so I joined Tried and True Pro at that point, just being a security guy. And a year later, about a year and a month later, we open up the academy. And I'm one of the very first students invited into that academy because Crimson knew from the moment I met him, that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted to be. I wanted to be trained to be a professional wrestler. And I wasn't going to stop at a single thing. Nothing was going to stop me from getting to that point. Mostly because I kept talking this man's ear off and constantly telling him, "Hey, when's the school going to open? Hey, when's the school going to be open?" So he got that for a full year. And eventually he got me to shut up.
Hey, you know what? You showing that passion opened the door for you, though.
Oh, yeah. And that's something he's always said that he's appreciated. And I appreciate that he appreciates it. I was very dedicated to being a part of the sport and being able to really give it the old college try and see professional wrestling was really the passion that I wanted to be. And luckily it is. I think, because if you don't mind me diving into my very first match,
No, please.
um, I was so nervous. Peed 16 times, didn't even have a single thing to drink that day. And I get told at the day of us having this little student show at the end of our first 12 weeks of training, I was told I'd be going up against our head coach. And at the time, our head coach was Jeremiah Plunkett. He's the one who broke me into the wrestling business, taught me all the basics, and I was told I was going to be going up against him. So I had no idea what to think about that. I was incredibly nervous because, yes, this is the man who trained me, but we hadn't been doing matches yet, anything like that. And I knew he was going to take care of me in the match. But also, I was extremely scared to screw up everything.
It feels like a
Or,
double-edged sword, right? Because on one hand, there's a lot more pressure because A, you know how talented he is, and B,
hmm,
like if anybody's expecting something out of you, it's going to be him. But on the other hand,
hmm,
obviously there's that familiarity and comfort where you're like, okay, I know he's great and I know he can take care of me and he knows my weaknesses. So I guess I can see it's like great and extremely nerve-wracking at the same time.
Oh yeah, and I still get like that when it comes to wrestlers I haven't wrestled with before, especially if it's somebody that it doesn't matter if they're on the same side of the ring as me or if they're on the opposite side. If it's somebody that I look up to or I have watched wrestle and I have a huge amount of respect for them, always makes me extremely nervous. The latest episode of NWA Power across the ring for me is Red Titus and Trevor Murdoch, and on my side of the ring is Dak Draper. And I got to know Dak a little bit over his short time being with the NWA. I've also got to know Rhett over his time being in the NWA and watching a few of his matches in ROH before ROH kind of did. I I guess they shut their doors for a little while before Tony Khan bought him out. And then Trevor was another one of those dastardly heels that I absolutely hated during the Ruthless Aggression era. Him and Lance Cade, they were terrorizing my tag team wrestling division. I just couldn't have it. And so I'm finally getting to work against Trevor and Rhett, two people that I have a lot of respect for, especially Trevor because again, big fan of his growing up. Well, not so much a fan, I guess the opposite of a fan because he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
But I came into that match extremely nervous. Obviously, not as nervous as I was for the very first match, but knowing how good Plunkett was, how smooth the guy was, and how great he was in the ring, obviously it was going to be nerve wracking because who am I? Just lowly Matthew Mims, just one of his students, and I wouldn't even say I was one of the best students or whatnot. They told me I was a good student. I wouldn't think I was the best student. I still thought I was pretty awkward. I had to unlearn a lot of things coming into pro wrestling, and so what really made me understand that this is the passion that I need to take with me, that I need to make this my life's work, is that I was so nervous beforehand and I was so worried about screwing up. And when that music hit and I walked out for the first time, something just clicked. It was a weird feeling. It was a different feeling. It was something that, you only kind of feeling like those really, really good dreams you have when
Mm.
you go to sleep and you're just like, yeah, this is the dream where I have the fancy Ferrari, I have the big house, I have this going on, that going on, or either I'm a stunt driver and I know I'm about to hit this big flip and I'm going to hit it flawlessly. Those fantastic good dreams, whenever those happen. That's kind of the feeling that hits me every time I walk out of the curtain. And it happened with this exact match on the very first match, and it kind of happens to me every single time I walk out. I have this thing about me to where before every match, I'll go over my head a few times and I'll get kind of nervous beforehand. And so the thing is that my nervous brain will forget everything we're supposed to do in this match right before I go out. If it's within the last 5 to 10 minutes before our match, I guarantee you I forgot every single thing we're gonna do. Don't know what it is. That's never fails. It happens every time with every match. We can talk about it up and down. We can prepare for it for hours beforehand, days beforehand. Doesn't matter. 5 to 10 minutes before we go out, I forgot everything. I don't remember
Mine
a
goes
single thing.
blank.
Exactly. Mine goes blank. I'm struggling to remember the entirety of this match. But the moment I hit that curtain, it's kind of like I go into autopilot and I'm in that dream mode. So I'm reenacting everything I thought of with this match and how exactly I wanted to walk through it. And it's kind of like you go from having a blank slate, your mind went blank, to being in this state of flow. And that's kind of what it is for me when it comes to pro wrestling. And that kind of feeling, I feel like that feeling is what they talk about when they say this pro wrestling thing is addictive. When they say you get addicted to that feeling, and I feel like I'm definitely addicted to that feeling. I got hooked on it the first time. The first time I was like, yep, no, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life.
It just felt right. You knew.
Oh yeah, it felt right. I knew it was something that I felt for a long time. I've done a lot of sports in my life. I've done a lot of different things in my life. And, certain things didn't feel like they fit. Some things felt like a close fit. Football felt like it was a close fit. I was very good at football. Um, and it was something that I enjoyed doing, but it just didn't feel right. It felt like I was close to what I was getting at. Same thing with amateur wrestling. I felt like I was very, very close to what I really needed to be doing. Once I got into pro wrestling, that's the first thing that I was just like, no, I know I'm supposed to be here. I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is my life's work. And that was the moment that kind of confirmed it. That was the moment that verified it. And I'm just glad that moment happened to be with Jeremiah Plunkett.
Yeah, very cool. And if I may, again, I am a fan of yours. That's why I reached out to you pretty early on, because I'm I think you have a certain you have personality and charisma, but I think there's an
Mhm.
infectious feeling because you obviously love what you're doing. And
Yeah.
not that other people don't, but when it's really clear that somebody loves what they're doing, there's an attraction there for fans and those in the business that they can really appreciate.
Yeah, and I share that same sentiment. I think I might have explained this to somebody in a side conversation before, but I asked them, you know, why do you think that a great example would be the New Day? Why do you think everybody loves the New Day so much? Why do you think that fans gravitated towards them whenever they kind of changed up their idea of what they wanted the New Day to be? Because at first it was, angry heels. That's kind of what it
Mm,
was. And I like that idea of it where they're just going to be like a nation of domination like 2.0. Well, why do you think people gravitated towards it when they made the small tweaks and they kind of just went out there and they were themselves? They were exactly the same goofy guys they were backstage that people were always telling them, hey, you should be more serious. You need to take this more seriously. No, they come out there every single night. They come out there no matter what town they're in and they enjoy themselves. You feel like you're also having a fun time because you're seeing people get out there and actually have fun.
yeah,
There's no extra acting. There's no, hey, I got to be the hardest tough guy in the room. I've got to be the most gangster guy you ever seen. No, it's guys going out there and having fun. They can still get aggressive. They're still being themselves. They're being fully rounded characters because they're literally just being themselves.
yeah. They're
I
authentic.
mean, yeah, exactly. They're authentic. And I mean, we can take one of the big comparisons I get all the time because they just say it looks like I don't know, like Biggie and Kofi Kingston did the fusion dance and they just made Mims. That's just how it works. And so if I compare myself to like let's say a Big E, he was able to take that same attitude and being himself to where people were naturally supporting him and he's naturally that big time baby face,
Mhm.
but still he can go out there and be as goofy as he wants to. But the moment he needs to change gears and get aggressive and take somebody down and really beat the crap out of them, he does. He doesn't hesitate to do that. It's hey, it's all fun and games the first time you overstep those bounds. And I like to think that I'm the same way because that's how we all would be. That's where I think people gravitate towards it. Is just you feel like it's real. You
Yeah,
you feel like this is how this person really is. When it comes to those guys in the New Day, I've only met one of them. I've only met Xavier one time. He was I think he was just backstage at an NWA thing. I think they were around the first season. I just shook his hand, said hi, yada yada. But outside of that, I don't really know those three guys. But when you watch what they do in the ring, when you see how they act when it comes to their promos or in ring work or any of the work that they're doing outside the ring, doesn't matter. It feels like you already know them. It feels like
yeah,
you've been friends with them for years. You know these guys in and out. And so I think that's the same thing people kind of get from me whenever I'm in the ring. And that's exactly what I wanted to go for is that they feel like they know who Matthew Mims is. Not Matthew Mims as a character, but Matthew Mims as an actual person. And the funny thing is, they do.
yeah.
They do.
You want that connection, and it's super cool because you always hear things like I think it was a Jerry Jarrett philosophy where the
Hmm.
idea was you want something to be 90% true, and then you slide into 10% work. And you could
Yeah.
and that same attitude works with your personality, your character on screen.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to go about it because, a lot of people can smell fake a million miles away.
Mhm.
And I'm never somebody who likes to associate the professional wrestling business with the word fake.
Yeah,
There's nothing fake about it. I'd rather just say work or something that's choreographed, anything like that. I'd never like to say fake. Um, and I feel like the closer your character or how you want to be seen on screen is, the closer that is to, real life, the more people gravitate towards it.
yeah.
I mean, who are some of the biggest characters, the biggest stars we've seen in professional wrestling were guys that were just being themselves.
Turn
It,
it up
at
to
least
11.
90% themselves. The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, RVD, Hulk Hogan, all these guys were just pretty much just being themselves up there.
Yeah. No, you're definitely right. So I want to go back a little bit to Jeremiah Plunkett. Shout out to him, by the way. He did follow, he's subscribed to us on YouTube, so shout out to him for that. I appreciate it. But what were your first impressions of him? What was it like training with him, and how's your relationship with him today?
My first impressions of him were actually pretty good after seeing his first couple of matches. He was on the very first show for Tried and True Pro back in 2015. I think he had a match. It was him and Tracy Smothers tagging against another team. And I got to see their work in there. And, I got to get a little bit of a good feel for him. But over that time, before he ever became my trainer, I got to see a lot of his matches with Tried and True Pro. Him and Crimson being very close friends for a very long time, he got to be a regular fixture there. And I really appreciate that. Because it was great to be actually trained by Jeremiah after being able to witness a lot of his matches live and becoming a big fan of his. I think still to this day, and I've told both of these guys who have trained me that one of my favorite matches, actually my absolute favorite match when it came to Tried and True Pro, was a match that he had with the next trainer that I would have, Crazy Steve. So him and Crazy Steve had a casket match. I think you might be able to find it somewhere on YouTube or at least on a DVD for Tried and True Pro. I think they still sell those DVDs on highsplash.com. It's definitely worth looking for. If you can find it on YouTube or you can find it on highspots.com, wherever they sell the Tried and True Pro DVDs, I definitely recommend finding the casket match between Jeremiah Plunkett and Crazy Steve. And so after seeing that match and being so hyped up for it, it was already naturally going to be cathartic for me to find out that Jeremiah Plunkett was going to be my main trainer. And with Jeremiah, he's such a good teacher and he was placed in such a great position to kind of teach us because he's so warm and inviting. Despite how mean and dirty his character looks in a lot of different places, especially before the NWA, uh, you know, it's kind of weird to see how much of a teddy bear, how much of a nice guy he is, and how he's the best. I can't shower enough praise on Jeremiah Plunkett. Would be here for weeks if I was doing that. Um, but my first impression of him as a trainer, like I didn't feel intimidated, which was great, especially coming into learning something completely new. I feel like in every aspect when it came to anything that I did with Jeremiah Plunkett, whether I'd have a match with him now, tomorrow, next week, anything like that, I always feel like I'm in good hands. It's somebody who I feel like actually cares, empathizes with how I feel about professional wrestling, and only wants me to be the best. And I love that about Jeremiah. It's something that makes him feel very genuine as a person, and it's something I can always believe that he has the best interest for me, for himself, and for anybody else involved in professional wrestling. He's kind of just like one of those warm wrestling dads. That's what I like to call him.
He
He's a
strikes
wrestling
me
dad.
he strikes me as the kind of guy that wrestlers like to have matches with
Mhm.
because, he seems to have great timing and he'll always make his opponent look great. He seems to have a great mind for it, but he's the kind of person who, even if fans don't necessarily appreciate it as much, especially because he's usually a heel, how good
Mhm.
he is, wrestlers would probably definitely appreciate his work. That's how he comes across to me.
Oh yeah, he's definitely one of those people that I think, kind of the term I used before, a pro wrestler's favorite wrestler. So your favorite
Yeah.
wrestler's favorite wrestler, and I think that's probably one of the great things about the current wrestling landscape. A lot more people are getting deeper into wrestling and they're getting to watch and appreciate a lot of your favorite wrestlers' favorite wrestlers. So some people who may have not got as much appreciation or got to smell their flowers or got to get their flowers as much as they did during the height of their career, or even now that they're wrestling, you get to see some of your favorite wrestlers, and they get a lot more appreciation than they would have, let's say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I like that with Jeremiah Plunkett, there's a lot of people out here that get to speak their mind and say how much they appreciate Jeremiah because he may have been one of those people beforehand that probably didn't get all their respect that they were due,
Mhm.
you know. Because it was again, it's just a conversation between wrestlers. You can go to almost any locker room if they know about Jeremiah Plunkett, they're going to be jumping up on their hands and feet or whatnot, saying how great this guy is, you know. But now the fans get to see it too, and that's something that I really like. They get to
Yeah.
appreciate his work too.
And his platforms, like this to a smaller degree, and obviously to a
Mhm.
much bigger degree, NWA and other stuff, where you can kind of help share not only your own legacy but other people's legacies. And I think that's another cool thing about the social media age and everything like that.
Oh yeah, that's one of the best parts about it.
So, could you also talk a little more about Crimson, about him as a person, him as because obviously he runs tried and true, right? So could you just talk about your experiences with him? Obviously, he hired you right away for the security, but what went on afterwards?
Yeah, honestly, with Crimson, this is the weird thing. I worked a job a few years beforehand. I think after he started Tried True Pro back in 2015, and I was always hearing from some bosses that I had, and then also from friends, man, you got to meet Crimson. You guys are so similar. You guys are really gonna get along. Blah blah blah. And I always hear about this guy, and I never actually got to meet him. This is the thing. And I was always 5 minutes too late. Oh, he was just here. Oh, man, he just left. And then finally, when we get to 2017, I actually didn't really get to meet him until after the show was over. So even when I came in hours before the show was there, I didn't actually get to see Crimson or meet him. And
Was
this
this
is
the
the
night you
thing.
did security?
Yes, this is the first night I did security
Okay.
for him. Crimson is the busiest man on the planet. Like everybody knows that. If you know Anthony Mayweather, you know that he is the busiest man on the planet. You better hope if you send him a text, you better hope you get an answer at least within the week. It's just because this man is the most in demand man around. When it comes to wrestling or anything outside of that, this man is always go, go, go. This man is a hustler in every sense of the word. This man is out here earning every single dollar that he gets. It's one of the huge amounts of praise that I can heap on this guy. And I'd be here for weeks if I was just sitting here just praising the man. But I think it was this weird thing where I thought like Crimson hated me at first. And I even told him about this whenever we first had a real conversation, which was a few weeks later after this. Um, every time I saw him when I was watching the shows, when I'd come there for the live shows, he would always just be like, I'd look around, nobody else is paying attention to me. I'm just, taking everything in. I look across the room, there's this guy, 6'4", covered in tattoos, big old mohawk, and he's just already staring me down. I'm like, okay, what did I do to this man who's across this room from me? We're in a sea of people and he's just eyes locked. Hey, I see you, dude. And I'm like, okay, this isn't good. And I finally meet him and I was like, oh boy, okay, this is a little bit intimidating. You got that really intimidating look about you. I guess that's the military in him, where he just learned to get the death stare, and he just had that. And he explained to me, he's like, "Nah, bro, it's kind of like a sign of respect. You see one of the other bigger guys in the gym, you're kind of gonna keep your eye on him. You're like kind of having a mental competition." He was like, "It's kind of like that." He was like, "Yeah, it's kind of like a respect thing." He was kind of like, I was kind of scouting talent. That's how it was. And so after that, I got to know Crimson a lot more. And there's still things that I learned about Crimson here and there. And I kind of got to see his vision for professional wrestling, and I wanted to share the same vision. And the fact that he brought the school to the area that he's in, to a new city that he's kind of adopted as a new home with Clarksville, Tennessee, I think that was a great gift, not only to me, but to a lot of people in the surrounding area, to bring professional wrestling here, to make Clarksville, Tennessee, try to build that into a wrestling town, because it takes a lot to build any place into a wrestling town. I mean, Memphis didn't become a wrestling town overnight. Nashville didn't become a wrestling town overnight. And currently, probably one of the biggest like areas for pro wrestling in Tennessee right now is in East Tennessee. That didn't happen overnight. East Tennessee wasn't um, a big wrestling hotspot here in Tennessee for a lot of professional wrestling's existence. Most of it was all in Memphis or in Nashville, some sort of part of Middle Tennessee, and now East Tennessee kind of has returned. And so, kind of seeing that building up and how hard he was working to kind of build it up like this and build up this territory. Um, it was a pretty great experience to try to see how he was building that. Even with the small team that he had, me included, it was really great to be a part of that. And that same hard work kind of got us to where we're at when it came to the NWA. It got us to our relationship with Billy Corgan and being able to execute his vision as best as possible. And that's why a lot of our guys from Tried and True Academy and Tried and True Pro in general, a lot of our wrestlers, a lot of our students all got to be a part of the NWA. It's these connections from that kind of hard work, from that dedication to not only this new adopted home of his, but also to the professional wrestling business.
I swear
And
you're
to
reading
his
my mind.
teams.
I know I sent you notes, but the way you're transitioning into the next question, perfect. Thank you so much. You're doing my job for me. It's great.
Yeah.
But what I was going to ask next actually is, when was the revival of the NWA? Because I know it's been around in various forms, but Billy Corgan's
Mhm.
Lightning One era. When did that come on your radar? And when did you first meet Billy? And do you remember your impressions of him in the beginning?
Yeah, so they've been on my radar for a little while once we started working with them. So a lot of stuff they did in the beginning, because I don't know if this is the most well documented thing, but Crimson and Nick, they've been good friends for a very long time. And luckily, Nick was able to try to give NWA a bigger platform and start to do this building up of the Lightning One era of NWA in conjunction with Billy, obviously. um, they took a risk with us,
Mhm.
with working with us, and obviously it's not that big of a risk because they trust each other, and they also like Nick knows about what we got going on with Tried and True
And
Pro.
you're talking about Nick
But
Aldis.
yes, yes, of course. And so we started working relationship with them, and I think, at least to my knowledge, from where I was placed at, where I got to be a part of this working relationship, because I obviously don't know everything that was going on there. I wasn't privy to every single conversation. I was just along for the ride. Anything Crimson said we were doing, I was doing. And it's still that same way now. That loyalty is still there for Crimson. Is always going to be there for him. Um, but we got to get started with them at the 70th anniversary show. So NWA 70, that was where we actually started a working relationship, because a lot of that infrastructure, that ring, a lot of setting up there, a lot of the backstage stuff, a lot of the prep stuff was all done by Tried and True Pro. So it was done by our students at our academy. It was done by our guys that typically work the crew. We were all a part of that. I was a part of that. There may be like certain shots you could probably find on the DVD where I'm out there working security. That was my first part of that. That was actually the first time I met Billy, and it was just the typical like, "Hey, how you doing?" Handshake. I'm blah blah blah. You're blah 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 type of situation. And my first impression of Billy was, one, it's gonna be very simplistic and silly, but man, this guy is tall. I did not expect him to be this tall. This is surprising. Most everybody I've met in the business so far in pro wrestling, they haven't always been the tallest men around.
Hmm.
So just to find this man towering over me a little bit, I was just like, okay, this is different for the first time. This is a little bit different. Um, and you know, also it was just that Billy was really down to earth. That was also something that kind of struck me as a surprise. With pro wrestlers, sometimes you don't expect them to be so down to earth, but like once I got into this business, I kind of expect that from a lot of pro wrestlers. But when it came to rock stars and musicians, I haven't met a lot of them. I think I've met like I randomly ran into like Justin Timberlake in like a bathroom at a gas station or something like that, because I'm just the bathroom celebrity
Yeah,
meter.
a lot of bathroom meetings.
A lot of bathroom meetings. It's weird. Bathrooms are magical. It's a magical place. But I had never really met or had an in-depth conversation with any musicians, especially somebody who's like lived a lot of their life in the spotlight. So it was kind of weird to see that Billy was so approachable and that he was easy to talk to. And it was a very small conversation, nothing too great, anything too big. We didn't get in too deep. I mean, he didn't even know my name at that point. But that was where our working relationship started. So I was just excited to be a part of that. I was excited to meet Cody Rhodes at the time. I was excited to meet Jim Cornette. And I was excited to meet Animal. And at the time, Animal was working with Jack Stain and Crimson, which was a big part of the reason why we were a part of everything. And so it was great to kind of absorb a lot of these stars that in any other situation I would have never had the chance to meet.
That's
And
that's interesting because
yeah.
I didn't even put two and two together because you mentioned a couple interesting names. How much were you around Cody? Was it just for that show, or were you around with him more than that?
Oh no, it was just for that show. If anything, it was just working security there. Me, my cousin, who's also a part of the NWA right now, we were working security for those guys closely. I mean, I think my cousin, because he's a production assistant with NWA, he handles like your head of ring crew, anything you see behind the scenes or you don't get to see behind the scenes. He's usually got his hand in some sort of way. But he is a big WCW fan. Loved NWA growing up because he was that big WCW kid. I was a big WWF kid, so there's a little bit of a difference between us. But he was having this time of his life at that meet and greet at the special events you have at live events where you get to meet some of the wrestlers, you get to meet some of the talent. And he was going absolutely nutty cuckoo because he got to sit there and work security for Jim Cornette's desk. Got to sit there at the Midnight Express table and have the time of his life. I think he even got his NWA television title. He got that signed by a lot of people that were in
Oh, that's super
attendance.
cool.
Oh yeah, no, it was fantastic. He got his $400 belt signed up by anybody he could possibly talk to, so it was a great experience overall. And I mean, with Cody, it was just small time conversations here and there. I'm pretty for sure he doesn't even remember who I am, but it was still a great experience to have that, regardless, and to kind of have that relationship with the NWA start there and something so small and innocuous was pretty great. You go from working security at the 70th anniversary show where they're building back up
Hmm.
to the prominence they're getting to, and you get to be a part of that. Even with even with at the time the uncertainty of where this would go. The only people that knew exactly where this would go was probably Billy Corgan himself and Dave Lagana. They were probably the only ones that absolutely knew, hey, we have this vision and it's going to come to fruition. Everybody else, it was still questions in the head, hey, what's going on here with NWA? And same thing with me at the time. I had no idea what was going to be happening. I didn't know it was going to be the best experience of my life and that this was going to be the start of what the rest of my life is in pro wrestling.
Yeah, that's very cool. And before we touch on, the first power tapings, because that was pretty big, I do want to ask more about Jim Cornette. Did you interact with him much during his short time with the company? Because he's a controversial figure, and we don't have to touch on the exit if you don't want to, but just in general, the fact that he's a guy with so much knowledge and so much experience. And yes, he's controversial and says controversial things, but as a fan of tag team wrestling, the Midnight Express were phenomenal.
Yeah,
So, what was your dealings with him, if any?
if anything, was just working for security for the guy at the NWA 7 show. And then obviously, I wasn't around for his era where he was presented with the Midnight Express. And I got to see him more in TNA. That's
Mm,
more where I actually saw Jim Cornette and where I actually really got introduced to him because, again, as a fan at that time and being a younger kid, I didn't know that much about pro wrestling. I knew it was easily digestible and was right there and convenient for me.
so, authority
Uh,
figure, Jim Cornette.
yes, yes, of course. And so when it came to NWA and those first sets of tapings, uh, the typical, first time conversation with anybody in pro wrestling, hey, my name is this, blah, blah, blah. And kind of getting to know Jim by seeing his interactions with other people, which were always great interactions. He was always someone that was trying to delve out knowledge. And I know there was definitely a lot of people that definitely want to hear whatever he had to say on it because he's a wealth of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of respect that I have for Jim Cornette because I'm somebody who listens to his show at least every week. At least every week, I'm listening to his show just because I like to get his opinions on certain things and also hear his knowledge and guidance, especially on tag team wrestling or in wrestling in general. The man knows what he's talking about when it comes to most, if not everything, when it comes to professional wrestling. Obviously, I don't share the exact same ideas or opinions about certain things in wrestling that he does.
Yeah.
Maybe more of the controversial things or whatever. I don't always share the same opinions on, but there's still a huge amount of respect that I have for Jim Cornette. And honestly, I wish that there was more of a working relationship I would have had with him, or that
Mm-hmm.
I would have been a more featured part of the company while he was still involved in the company. And even with the exit, it's still, hey, stuff happens, stuff gets said, and people got to change. You got to change tactics. You got to change your perspective. You got to change how you're doing business when certain things happen. And by all means, I'm still somebody who, you know, from the limited knowledge that I had of his interactions with NWA and what was going on with him, I'd still want him back in the company. I mean, he's one of the best color commentators you can have, and also he's one of the best minds in the business. So it's always an asset to have somebody like that in your back pocket.
And it had to be cool. At this point, you were still relatively young in your career. And again, we're going to get to the power in just a moment. So to have someone like Jim Cornette call your matches must have been a big milestone moment for you, in your career.
Oh yeah, it still is to this day. I mean, obviously, like I would have wanted to have like a more featured match instead of kind of the matches that I had that were short and sweet to the
Yeah.
point, and have Jim Cornette call those, and have the full on traditional like play calling.
Yeah.
But I still hold it as a feather in my cap, I guess you could say, for my professional wrestling career, is that Jim Cornette was one of the people that were doing color commentary whenever I was out there wrestling, when I was out there being terrible at wrestling like I am.
No, that's super cool. Okay, let's get to the first episode of Power because you were on the first episode. You teamed with Danny White in a short match with Tom Latimer and Royce Isaacs. How did the opportunity come about? Was it all through the Tried and True connection? And did you know at the time how popular the NWA revival was going to be? And did you know it was going to be on YouTube?
There wasn't a lot of things that I knew. The first thing, and I guess I'm pulling back the curtain a little bit, I was told by my trainer at the time, Tom Latimer, that he had recommended me to Dave Lagana uh, for just the position to be in one of their first matches to kind of showcase them and showcase their talent on the new show. I was going. I had no idea a new show was happening. It was kind of just like a secret, like, hey, brother, keep it on the low, brother. But he wanted me and my tag team partner at the time, my best friend, Miguel, the guy who got me into wrestling. He wanted us to be the ones to kind of have the honor to be in that showcase match with them, to show off the new tag champs and kind of let people know um, who they are and how they were going to be established on that first episode. So I was very excited for it. Unfortunately, some things happened to where my best friend couldn't be a part of that same memory with me. So he was replaced with one of the other students and one of the other higher figures within Tried and True Pro, one of Crimson's go-to guys. He's still one of Crimson's right hands with Danny White, and we got to have that opportunity to wrestle. And still, like, I still look at Danny White as a friend, and we're still pretty cool to this day. We still do whatever Crimson wants us to do to this day. With a smile on our faces. And it was a great memory to share with Daniel being in that match with Tom. And it was great to be in that match with Tom and with Royce. They took good care of us. And honestly, that was the first match I've had that nervousness never happened. Not a single drop of nervousness. I came out there like it was just another
Really?
day in the office, and I had a ton of fun. It was weird at the time. Uh, because I'm not shy at admitting anything that is true. I'm not somebody who usually believes in, lying or pumping up my stats for anything. I'm only about like a little bit over 4 years in. I still at this point haven't even had 100 matches. Not even hit 100 yet.
Yeah.
Pretty for sure. I'm still pretty well below 100 right now. But that being, I think that one was probably like maybe in front of people, probably like maybe like my 15th match ever.
So why do
So
you
it
think there
was.
wasn't a lot of nerves there? Do you think it's because it wasn't really a showcase for you? And do you think maybe that made it a little easier? Because if you're having a normal 10, 15-minute match, it's a lot, you've got to show up and show up. I mean, you still have to show up, but you're working to give the focus on them. Is that why there was less nerves for you think? Or are you not sure?
Yeah, I think that, and then being in there with the guy who was also currently at that time my trainer, who we had already got to be in a lot of situations and practice a lot of more advanced things because he was Tom Latimer was the trainer for the advanced course for Try and True Pro.
All right.
Uh, Being in there with him and learning a lot more to expand on what I do now. Like the reason why even now being under 100 matches, I can still go out there and give a pretty good, pretty decent showing. I'm not the best wrestler in the world, but
Modest.
I obviously have some aptitude for it, and a lot of that is in thanks to Tom because that continued training. I was technically training for over 2.5 years,
Hmm.
so I think that kind of made it easier for me. And the fact that again, Tom, big teddy bear, big teddy bear. Whenever you work with Tom, you know you're gonna be safe. It's the same thing as Plunkett because they're just such great guys, in and out of the ring. They're such great people, and you're going into that match having a great match, and you're gonna get taken care of. And on top of that, I mean, kind of to be funny, Daniel himself was a nervous wreck. He was the one that was really nervous. I think he took all the nervousness for the both of us because the guy was freaking out. He was constantly pacing backstage, and I was like, "Brother, we're only going to be in there for like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
We're getting in and we're getting out. We're getting beat up. We're going home, brother. Like, why are you so nervous?" So I think that's kind of what made it like that situation where I was like, "Yeah, I'm calm, cool, and collected." Now, unfortunately, that didn't last because after that, I went right back to being the nervous wreck I usually am before my matches. But for that first experience in the first episode, it was kind of great to come into it feeling like I've been doing this for 20 years and just walking out like this is going to be the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, and that sets the tone, hopefully, for what people think about you when you show a little confidence. I mean, you don't want to come
Yeah.
off overly confident, of course, but still. Now, you talked about working with Tom, and you also
Mhm.
worked with LA Knight and James Storm early, and these are guys who have been, James Storm, he's been wrestling for, I think, borderline 25 years now. LA Knight
Mhm.
has been going for a long time. What was it like working with such long tenured veterans and people who've had big TV experience as well?
Yeah, honestly, in that match, the only thing that made me nervous was because I had seen James around and obviously Josephus, who was the person I was privileged to be a partner with at the time.
Hmm.
I had seen those guys around a ton just because they're in the Tennessee area, they're very close to Crimson, and then on top of that, they've been fixtures with Try and True Pro and a lot of different things going on with those indies around this area. I never got to work with James, and the fact that James is so confident and he's the guy, he's a loudmouth, confident dude, and he can always back it up. That made me a little bit nervous, but I think more of the nervousness came from working with at the time Eli Drake, the now LA Knight, because again, this guy is walking confidence. He is charisma personified. So
Yeah,
being able to come in and work with him, and he was a hard guy to read backstage. Um, and then me just being this brand new guy, barely did anything, barely can keep my nose clean, green as cow poop, just coming in there and getting to work with these guys, especially Josephus, because Josephus was already somebody that I was a big fan of, just because this guy, one, he was a jokester, he was a Mr. Funny Man, but seeing him all the time with Try and True Pro, even more than James Storm, I kind of felt like I knew what he had going on, and with him having like the Josephus Brody gimmick, it was a little bit intimidating, especially when I first met him through Try
hmm,
and True Pro. But it coming into that match, I was definitely nervous all over again, just for the things I already named off right there. So I was asking Josephus tons of questions before we are going out there. Again, this match is only like 4 minutes, maybe six at the most. And still, just I'm so nervous to screw up. I'm like, this is my opportunity to finally really, move beyond these matches and really get featured. So I'm scared, super duper scared. I'm working with another group of tag team champions, and again, you've got all these three guys in here that are just balls of charisma. They are nothing but charisma in human suits, and
yeah.
I'm just new guy. I'm new guy. In worse gear this time. I'm just new guy. So
What a cool spot to be in though with those three guys.
yes, very much so. I very much enjoyed being in that spot. In that match is still something I look back on and I'm still proud of. Uh, all the matches that I had when it came to the first three seasons, even though again they were just what people will call squash matches, I still had a lot of fun doing them, and it was great to finally have that experience and not be too overwhelmed. I like to say all the time that I get thrown to the wolves when it comes to the NWA, and I do. And at this point, I didn't feel so much like I was getting thrown to the wolves, just because again I'm around people that I know, or at least I feel like I know.
Hmm. And I guess, on some level, it's kind of a good way for you to build comfort and experience by having these short, squash matches, enhancement matches, whatever you want to call it. But, you're not the focus, but you can start working in front of a camera. You get that experience working, on YouTube and everything. So it's not like you're coming in a high profile role and it's sink or swim. It's like, no, you get to build yourself up and you get to get adjusted to it. So that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, and like a lot of people will say, NWA is a company where they allow you to mess up. They allow you to make mistakes, and you can learn from them. And I've definitely made plenty of mistakes on camera, off camera when it came to the NWA, and it's one of the best places I've had to learn. That's why, again, I can kind of tout the whole lack of experience. I can tout that as a good thing just because all my experience that I do have
Hmm.
is on this high of a professional level. Most, if not all, of my matches, I'd say probably just a very small percentage of my matches are matches outside of NWA. Most of the knowledge that I've gotten from professional wrestling, all the mentorship that I've got, almost all of it has been contained in the NWA. It's from that NWA locker room. It's from veterans who have such a gold mine of knowledge and experience that I get to hear on a daily basis whenever it comes to NWA. When it comes to NWA taping days, whenever I'm out with them, I get to hear it all the time, and so it's kind of a very invaluable experience. And even back to the idea of you know getting thrown to the wolves, I think that's a that's a bit of an overstatement, because again, look who I'm working with.
Yeah,
Nothing but top
pros.
tier professionals at the top of their game. So am I really being thrown to the wolves? No, I'm being taken care of in everything. It's never that big of a risk because of who I'm working with.
Yeah, like what you're saying, to me, one of the appeals of NWA when it first came out was the freedom to fail. And I think as a fan, that provides some excitement because you don't know what to expect. Not everything's necessarily going to hit. Some
Mhm.
things can go off, especially like the promos and the interviews
Yeah.
specifically, because they just they feel more authentic for good or for bad, usually for good, and
Mhm.
it's like when things are overly rehearsed as a fan, you can kind of get the idea where they're probably always going to be good, but you're rarely going to get something extremely memorable. While when something's more off the hook, it can be really bad, it can be a train wreck, or it can be phenomenal, but it's memorable.
Yeah. And I think with those phenomenal promos or those things that really stick out to people, I mean, we could even talk about, let's say, like the Hard Times promo from Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah.
We made a whole pay-per-view based off of that, a whole pay-per-view series now, because we just had Hard Times 3 not too long ago. That was made off of a promo that, at the time there weren't always, you know, groundbreaking promos coming out, from guys just come out there and just saying exactly how they felt. But I think that's kind of how it's supposed to work with pro wrestling. That's how it's supposed to work with any art form. You
Mhm.
have a lot of good to decent art, and then eventually you have those things that are just great. Those absolute just chef kiss moments where you're just like, this is the thing you need to show people when it comes to professional wrestling. Like, let's say, for example, my favorite professional wrestler, Triple H. Great promo.
Mhm.
Always has a good promo. But then out of all those great promos, out of all those good promos, you have the perfect promo that comes up. You have the perfect one here. You have the perfect line here. You have the perfect match here. Triple H is never, he doesn't have bad matches to me. That's just not how that works.
No.
He doesn't really have bad matches to me. There's not any match you can point out and be like, oh, that match kind of sucked. And it just happened to involve Triple H. No. And you'll have nothing but good matches and great matches. And then you have this absolute perfect timeless classics. You have
Yeah.
those matches you can go and pick up here and there and be like, oh, on this day at this pay per view or on this day on this episode of Raw or on SmackDown, this is where like, oh, you have that favorite little nugget that you're just like, this is the perfect Triple H match. This is the one I got to show people. So I think it's good to have that ability to mess up, that ability to fail, because I think it makes those times where you do shine your brightest shine even brighter. If every promo is the greatest thing you've ever heard, then they're not.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
And I
saying?
think it's harder. This sounds really bizarre, but I think sometimes it's harder for fans to appreciate it. A guy I think of immediately is Mick Foley. In my opinion, he's arguably one of, if not the best talker of all time. Phenomenal.
Yeah,
But I think it was almost to a detriment because he delivered such a high level every time he spoke that people forget how amazing he is because he just knocked it out of the park every single time.
exactly. You have a very good point there because I never thought of, him in that same aspect. I thought of him as, obviously a fantastic character and then having very good promos, but he's so consistently good, it's kind of just something you start to take for granted.
Yeah.
It's like if you're waking up every morning and you get $100 every time you wake up, eventually $100 is like getting a $1 bill. It's like getting a penny.
Yeah.
So, you want to feel like you're getting $1 a day, $5 a day, $10 a day, and then every now and then you're getting $100, and you're a lot more appreciative of it. And I still want to be one of those people that are very consistent, where everything that I do is good or great, blah blah. And then I still want to have those moments where you're like, this man has outdone himself. This is
Where you can turn it
ridiculous.
up.
How can he get this good? Yeah, exactly. And I never want to be somebody that has to turn to, oh yeah, I have to be bad on purpose so people can appreciate the good things I'm doing. No, absolutely not. I want to top myself every single time. I want to compete with myself. That's what I
Yeah.
want to do. I want to have that Drake effect where he's just competing against himself on the top of the charts. I want to be able to do that same thing when it comes to professional wrestling, when it comes to promos, when it comes to my in-ring work, when it comes to my character work. I think that's one of the best things about being one of those great pro wrestlers with the Triple H, with the Mick Foley, is that sometimes they're literally just competing with themselves.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I do want to go on to, I won't say a bad subject, although obviously it wasn't a happy one. The
Mhm.
pandemic. It when it
Mhm.
hit professional, obviously it hit the world, and we don't need to go into everything that it did there. But for professional
Yeah.
wrestling specifically, it shut down a lot of professional wrestling. I mean, you had a few companies still managing to run it first, but those
Mhm.
were without fans and with excessive or with like extreme protocols where you didn't know, like there were no fans, you couldn't see them on it was crazy. And I was talking to Johnny LaQuasto, and he was working for WWE at the time when the pandemic hit, and he was
Mhm.
talking about how he was the 205 Live was the first show filmed. It didn't air first, but was the first show filmed with no fans. And what a bizarre experience that was. What was it like for you as a wrestler, just especially because you were still pretty new when the pandemic hit? So how did that slow down your career? What was your experience like trying to find bookings? Like, could you talk about that?
Yeah. So when it came to it slowing wrestling down, yeah, I mean, I obviously if that wouldn't have happened, I possibly would have had more opportunities to bolster my numbers when it came to the matches that I had.
Hmm.
But also, fortunately, unfortunately, I get to look at the pandemic as something a bit different than how a lot of people do. In that same situation, unfortunately, it was negative for the majority of people. Most, if not all people, it was a very negative experience for that
Yeah.
time. And fortunately for me, it was a very positive experience for most of that. Just because of the fact that that's where I got the opportunity to work with Impact Wrestling, and I still got to find ways through my connections that I have through Crimson and Tried True Pro, to still find work within wrestling. And yes, there was still a lot more downtime, and in between everything we were doing with professional wrestling, obviously, because it was very hard to operate in that same time, and NWA itself kind of shut down. And unfortunately, some people with the NWA happened to leave, and that kind of made way for me to be more of a featured talent. And I'm appreciative of that, even though, again, I don't want anything negative to happen to anybody just for me to get an opportunity. But unfortunately, sometimes that's kind of how the cards end up falling.
And that is how
And
wrestling works. You know, people are going to
yeah.
move on, and it gives opportunities for new people to move on up. And
Mhm. And I think that gives new opportunities for people to step up. And I think for me, that was where I got the new opportunity to step up. I got the new opportunity to step in and fill roles and fill holes where they sprouted up. And I got to see if I could sink or swim because I was kind of thrust into it. But I had people that were in my corner that believed in me. And the main person who did at that time, because of the situation of the pandemic, who actually had some frequent visits to our training school, was Nick Aldis. He was the person that was behind me to push me to be a more featured star. So, with just the few times we've got to film a few things, I'm not sure if those things will ever like really see the light of day that we got to film at the training school with Nick under his supervision, between me and Miguel. uh, that, and then him being a part of our training sessions, giving these impromptu seminars day in and day out, it really helped shape a lot of my professional wrestling, how I saw professional wrestling. It gave me great blocks of a foundation to be a better professional wrestler for the NWA at the time that they did come back.
mhm.
If it wasn't for Nick's influence, there'd be a lot of things that would be very different. For me, I think in a negative way. If Nick wasn't around at the school, giving his advice, giving that brutal honesty, that's one of the reasons why I still love Nick to this day. Is that that man is brutally honest. He is not going to blow smoke up my butt. He's not going to act like something's good when it's not. And that's something that I love to hear. When it comes to veterans that are around me, I ask them for critiques. I ask them to watch my matches. I ask them what they really think because I don't want anybody to sugarcoat it for me.
How
If
can
I
you
want
get
to be the
better if
best,
you don't know?
exactly. If you want to be a better professional wrestler, you need to know where you're screwing up. I mean, just I think it was either yesterday or the day before yesterday. I was asking Pope. I was like, "Hey, can you watch the last match that just came on? The match I just had against Trevor Murdoch and Red Titus. It give me some notes." And he gave me a full-on list of notes of stuff to work on and stuff to improve with, or other ways I could have done stuff, and I really appreciate that. And that's was something that I got from Nick before we got back into, obviously NWA operating again, and then he used his influence in the company to make for sure that I was going to be a featured star. So it's kind of having that belief from him and being able to follow through with that and having that constant supervision, here and there before we got back, that ended up making it an even better situation for me. And again, getting to work with Impact is great. Getting to have a little bit of television time and being able to, um, with Tommy Dreamer's blessing both times, be able to get some reps in and kind of see where I had holes in my game, because I definitely still wasn't ready for TV and to be featured at the time that I had those matches with Impact. But I was able to have the opportunity to find that out,
Mhm.
because you're going to be confident until you find out you're not exactly ready.
So that's interesting. The pandemic was actually, in a way, allowed you to grow as a performer.
Oh yeah, a lot. I think that's where a lot of the growth came from, and it set me on the right path to keep growing when it came to the NWA, because of just sometimes happenstance and serendipity, that brought me to where I'm at right now. It's it's a lot of good luck and bad luck in a lot of places to get me where I'm at right now, and I feel like I'm at the best place I could possibly be in.
Now you've been super generous with your time, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. But there's a few questions that either we touched on that I'd like you to expand on, or a few questions left. One, Nick Aldis, he did
Yeah.
unfortunately leave National Wrestling Alliance, as far as we can tell, and not
Mhm.
necessarily on the best of terms. You don't necessarily need to, focus on his exit, but what
Mhm.
do you think? You talked a little about his impact on you personally. What do you think about his influence on the National Wrestling Alliance? And what are your just general thoughts and interactions on Nick?
He was the cornerstone of the company, and I think in a lot of ways his vision was what shaped the best parts of the NWA. Obviously, in conjunction with Billy, you can't exactly count Billy out of obviously the company that's also his baby, but
Yeah.
Nick Aldis put his heart and soul into the NWA. Throughout everything that I knew about it, he put a lot of time and effort into it, a lot of unpaid hours, a lot of thankless jobs that he did for the NWA. And I really appreciate everything that he brought to the NWA. He gave me a platform to be on. Not just Billy, but also Nick's efforts continuously made for sure that people were able to feed their families. They were able to have that opportunity. It is hard to talk about the NWA, even up to this point, without talking about Nick Aldis and how much he did for the company. And there's a lot of people that will never know how much he did for this company. And I'm very appreciative of that. And, I can't exactly speak about his exit because I don't know what was going on personally between him and Billy. All I knew is about what happened between me and him and what
Mm.
I personally saw. And it's unfortunate they didn't have a relationship that lasted as long as I thought it would. I
Hmm.
didn't think this was really a relationship that would break up at any point in time. But then again, hey, we got proven time and time again that a lot of things that you don't expect happen. I mean, the pandemic is one of them.
Yeah.
Nobody expected that to happen. Nobody expected that to disrupt wrestling or to really stop wrestling, but it did. Um, and with Nick, I can't. He's one of the many people that I have to thank for what I do have in professional wrestling, and for believing me in any sort of amount, or using any of his influence to do me a favor, to help me out. Because again, who am I? Who am I to Nick Aldis for him to stick his neck out and do anything for me like he did? Same thing with the Crimson, with the Jeremiah Plunkett, with the Crazy Steve, with the Tom Latimer, with the Jack Stain, with any of the guys who stuck their necks out for me, even all the way up to the top with the Billy Corgan, with the Pat Kenny. Who am I for them to stick their neck out for or whatnot? And that really humbles me that they're willing to do those things for me, that they're that generous, that magnanimous to give me not only their time but also their attention and their appreciation. It's a big thing for me. Um, so and I still have a high amount of respect for Nick, and that's not really going to go away. I understand that there's the bad taste that NWA has in their mouth for Nick, and Nick has a bad taste in his mouth when it comes to the NWA. But again, I'm somebody who likes to look more on the positive side of everything that's going on here. You
And
know.
hey, it is pro wrestling. It is a business. Sometimes these things happen. And who says they're
Mhm.
permanent? Sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes people need a healthy distance and things get better in time. Sometimes people just work better apart. Either way, I'm
Yeah.
sure both will prosper on their own.
Oh, of course. I have all confidence in the world in Nick Aldis because I mean he was the cornerstone of our company for a reason. And then same thing with the NWA. The NWA is something that has been brought to a point now to where it's just starting to really, really hit a stride.
Mhm.
Where there's still bigger and bigger things that are planned not just for 2023 but 2024 and beyond that. And I think that both entities, obviously Nick Aldis and the NWA, will still continue to strive.
Yeah,
And
when we're talking to Joe Galley, NWA, they have a live Powerrr coming up. They have a
Mhm.
show in Mexico coming up. There's a lot of big things for the company in the future.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more things that people don't know about. Yeah, there's even more things that out of the amount that I know about that I'm not allowed to talk about. There's even more outside of that that I don't know about yet. That hasn't left Billy haven't hasn't left Billy's mind.
Hmm.
Hasn't left Joe Galli's lips, hasn't left Kyle Davis's lips. Nobody else is going to know about it until the time comes for it. And so it's got me excited for next year. It's got me extremely excited for everything that's going on with professional wrestling, and then also especially for NWA. To know there's a lot of plans in place to continue to boost our numbers up with viewership and then also with fan engagement. I'm extremely excited. I can't be anything but.
Yeah, very cool. You touched on working with Impact during the
Mhm.
pandemic. Could you go a little more into that? How did it come up, and what was your experiences like? Because I believe you worked with Reno Scum and Was it Zachary Wentz?
Yes, it was. So with those experiences, I had no idea I was going to be able to work outside of, doing my crew stuff because that's what we were in charge of doing. Impact Wrestling, they were utilizing Skyway Studios, which they utilized that area in Nashville, Tennessee, that recording studio, because I guess it's like kind of their home base outside of the Canadian home base. I think they still have. And so they shot a lot of their stuff during the pandemic in that studio. So who's one of the closest promotions or at least training schools around that has a very good ring they can provide to them? Try and True Pro. So we were able to provide the infrastructure for them to keep producing their shows. And I think that was actually a very good opportunity to not only keep myself focused on professional wrestling during that time, but also to, luckily get an opportunity to work and then see where I was at that point in time. Because, everybody's confident, like I said, until you're tested.
Hmm.
And I got tested and I didn't do terribly, didn't do badly. These matches were still very good matches, in my opinion, especially for where I was. And for the people that I was working with who were already great professionals in the first place, they carried me to great matches and they took good care of me. Um, but I got to see where I need to do more work, not only on my wrestling, my character work, my speaking skills in the ring, but also on my own physical well being. So I thought that was a great opportunity for me that Tommy Dreamer trusted me enough to not only give me one match, but to give me two matches. And there are things, again, they don't have to stick their neck out for me. They didn't have to do Jack Diddley's squat for me. And I still would have been appreciative for where I was in the first place, being able just to help out and be a part of something that was bigger than what I was. And
So,
so it was all around great experience to be there and, meet some of the people there and kind of get a feel for what Impact Wrestling is really about.
so was it mostly Tommy Dreamer that you dealt with? Did you deal with Scott Demore at all?
Only a few times here and there. Obviously, your few conversations, getting to know people here and there, and then also dealing a little bit with D'Lo. But it was never anything like super duper intimate. With professional wrestling, you don't always get to have like close relationships with everybody. You get to have
Yeah,
close relationships with the few people you do, and you're already lucky enough in professional wrestling.
yeah.
It's not to say that anybody's bad people or anything like that. Not to say that there was no attempt to have a closer relationship with me or anybody else. It's just, hey, it's just how it happens in professional wrestling.
Especially on TV days, people are busy.
Oh yeah, no, boy, uh, everybody's running around like chickens with their head cut off whenever it comes to television days. So you kind of you stick around, you get whatever interactions you can get, I guess.
So what I would say is your biggest rivalry while
Mm,
in NWA so far has been with Idol Management. You've been with, Austin Idol himself, Tyrus, Black G's, Jordan Clearwater. What has
mm,
it been like working with this entire cast of characters? Because I'm sure you have different opinions and interactions with all of them. Could you just talk
mm.
about your experiences with them and the feud and how that helped propel you to a new level?
Yeah, honestly, when it came to this feud, and I always struggle when it comes to interviews, either speaking kayfabe or speak out of kayfabe. Um, but I've had a great experience with it so far, even up to the worst possible experience I've had in professional wrestling so far, which I would still kind of say is, even though it's the worst, it's kind of still like a silver lining with the concussion that I got back in June, whenever I was having the first TV title match I ever had. Um, I got that concussion, and there was a couple backstage things with that kind of happened to where there was definitely some locker room heat for your boy afterwards. And I'd kind of been working through that for the past couple months. Shoot, I may be bringing it back up just by talking about it in the first place.
Oh boy.
But it's fine. I had to learn a lot more about myself and how I carried myself in professional wrestling, and also how I saw professional wrestling. I had this thing where once I got into the business, I kind of hung on everybody's word, and I really cared. Not, I wouldn't say that it was a lot. It was a little bit too much. So I was always afraid of screwing up and messing up, and I always cared. I took a lot of weight with what anybody thought. Uh, no matter what happened, I was always scared I was going to screw up. I was scared of heat. I was scared of this. I was scared of that. And then finally, I got confronted with that situation. Same thing with my very first injury. I'd never really been injured in pro wrestling. I've been hurt plenty of times, never had a serious injury. And then this was my first serious injury. It was my first bout with legitimate heat. that I knew for a fact. It wasn't just like any speculation. I knew that I had heat. And I'm not going to specify who the heat was with or how the heat came about or exactly what was involved in that situation because a lot of people do know about it. And it's not exactly like a big public knowledge thing, and it shouldn't be. Um, but I got to deal with all those things that I was at that point I'd never had the chance to deal with. And I finally got to see how I would deal with those things because they're unavoidable. When it comes to heat or locker room heat or just heat in general, it's something that's unavoidable. It was something I was always told throughout training, even though it was like my biggest fear was to have heat. Oh, I don't know what to do in this situation. And I finally was actually experiencing it. Same thing with an injury. You're guaranteed in pro wrestling to get hurt. You're not guaranteed to get injured,
Mm-hmm.
but you're guaranteed to get hurt. And I've been hurt plenty of times, like I said. So now I'm actually dealing with an injury. Now I'm actually doing these things. I have to see if I'm going to fold under that pressure. And this is probably the biggest thing that I was thankful for when it happened. As I was sitting in the hospital bed, I was I was thinking to myself about everything that I was really worried about. Would I be able to wrestle again? Would this concussion be, even though it's my first concussion, would this be the concussion that basically ends my career? Because sometimes a single concussion can end your career. You could have a
Yeah.
bunch of concussions. You could be somebody that has like 50 concussions in their entire career, and 51 is the one that really, yep, you're done. You can't do anything.
Or it can be
This is
number
life
one.
altering one.
Yeah.
Or it could be number one. And so that's all I thought about while I was in that hospital bed, while I was at home recovering during any of this. I didn't one time think when it came to the concussion or the heat that I had to work off, I didn't think that I was going to quit. That was never something that was on my mind. And that was something that I didn't think about until months after this had all happened, after everything with that had pretty much blown off. Because at this point, everything has blown over. The concussion's not a factor anymore. The heat is pretty much dissipated. That's all bygones are bygones, yada yada. And that's how it works with these things. And I didn't think about it until a few months ago that I never at one point thought to myself, I need to quit. I never thought of quitting NWA. I never thought of quitting professional wrestling. I never thought of giving up in any shape or form at all. I didn't even have doubt in myself. I was kind of just thinking about when's the soonest I can get back in the ring, which I think that's the, like I said, that's the thing I'm the most appreciative of is that I was tested, truly tested more than I ever have been before, more than just getting in the ring with somebody who's extremely seasoned, more than getting in the ring with somebody I respect a whole bunch and being nervous and conquering that. No, I got to conquer the things that I feared the most, both of the things I feared the most in professional wrestling at the same time.
What was
I
it
got
that
to see
caused
that
the
on the way.
concussion?
Hmm?
What was it that caused the concussion?
Oh, it was very early on in the match. It was a spot that I wanted to take a spot that I saw at a match. I saw it during Randy Orton's first world title reign. He had a match with Kane, and I wanted to copy a spot specifically from there. And it was a spot where I would get up on the second rope, throw some punches at Tyrus from the second rope, and then he would push me off. He would charge at me. I would get out the way, and then I would give him some more shots. But his back would be turned to me at the time that I did it.
Hmm.
Well, it kind of happened in between that spot that Randy Orton and Kane did. So I wanted to, whenever I got pushed off the second rope in the first part of that, I wanted to bump and roll and
Hmm.
land in that corner. I decided to, in midair, instead of taking a regular flat back bump, I started to roll prematurely while I was in the air. So I ended up landing pretty high and tight. I still have not watched the match or seen when it actually happened, but I guess I landed and I tried to roll and I landed just on my head, my shoulders.
Oof.
And so when I did that and I rolled up, like it was literally just a split second. I just hit the ground, didn't hurt, didn't feel a thing, just rolled back up, and it felt like I had my hands covering my ears. And I was like, huh, that's kind of weird. Anyways, and then I started trying to, I remember what I did was I tried to, I guess, like shake my head or move my arm or something like that. And it didn't work. And I was like, oh, why can't I move?
That's worrying.
Like I was moving. The thing was my body was moving. I was moving. It's just I wasn't moving my body. So it's kind of weird to describe it. I think the only person that I had talked to about it A few months after it happened, that really understood what I was talking about because the exact same thing happened to him was Nick Aldis. We had a conversation at Starcast, and he was like, "Yep, same thing happened to me." He was like, "It happened during a World Championship match I had in Impact Wrestling," and he was like, "I got concussed, and I was pretty much on autopilot." He was like, "It was like that for a few days," and I said that I was on autopilot for the rest of that match. So for the rest of the 12 minutes of that match, I was on autopilot. I couldn't control a single thing I was doing. That was not me wrestling that match. That was I like to visualize my matches whenever I go over them beforehand. And so everything that you saw on camera, if you got to watch that match at Always Ready, was basically what I had visualized and walked through in the back. So I had no control over my body for the entirety of that. I didn't get control over my body until I got out into the hallway after the match, and then I had full control. And probably about like 20, 30 minutes after that, I was on a stretcher going to the hospital.
Wow.
Because it just kind of, I guess the adrenaline had fully worn off after like 30 minutes or so. And then, like, probably the worst headache I've ever had in my life. Yeah, it wasn't too great. Um, but yeah, no, like, still having that experience, I was, I didn't really know what to do with that. I didn't know if you just become a tough guy and you just tough it out, or either you just kind of, do the right thing, which in this situation, I did the wrong thing by finishing the match. I should have tried to get out of the match a little bit earlier, but hey, I had no control of my body. It happens. Um, but still, I'm still thankful for the experience overall. To me, it's not an experience I look back on negatively. I like to think of the fact that one, I was in the ring with somebody that I could trust and somebody was going to take care of me when I did get concussed. And he did. Whether he knew I was concussed or not, he still took care of me. And I still had a great medical staff that took care of me whenever it came to going to the hospital and getting seen for the 6 hours I was in there. I still had a company that still cared about my well being, no matter what happened afterwards or, whoever was mad at me for whatever I did here and there, yada, yada. It was still people that still cared about my well being. If anything, I think that was at the source of, you know, probably the vitriol that I got was that people were worried about me.
Yeah.
And I still appreciate that. And I still think that it's great that I got to experience that so early on. So I try to think of a universe where I go through what, let's say 10, 15 years of pro wrestling, never have an injury, never have locker room heat or heat at all. And then I finally have it. And I don't know what to do. So, and it could be a lot worse. So I got to deal with it beforehand. I got to deal with my worst and darkest day in professional wrestling, and I got to handle it in a way that I think I handled it well. I think I handled it well so far.
Yeah, it was a great learning experience, clearly, and obviously, it's not something you necessarily want to have happen, but the fact that it helped you grow is a positive way of looking at it.
Oh yeah, definitely. It definitely helped me grow. And honestly, looking back at it now, I wouldn't change a single thing that happened with it. And that's not always something you can say about negative experiences. Not everybody's going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm happy my grandma died, or I'm happy my dog died, or something like that. And so I think that's also just because I have a huge appreciation for professional wrestling. So anything negative or positive that's happened to me over my journey in professional wrestling is always going to be looked at as a positive, a net positive overall, because I'm still moving forward. I still can move forward. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a healthy attitude. And I appreciate that, you've given so much time. I'm gonna ask you one more question, then we'll hit the plugs. I could probably
Yeah.
talk to you, if both of us had the time, we could probably do another hour and a half of just talking about the various things in the NWA. So, maybe
Yeah.
one day we'll do a part two. But my last question before we hit plugs, at arguably your biggest match of your career was at NWA 74 with EC3, and you're wrestling at the Chase, which is a historic venue. What was it like working with EC3? Can you talk about having such a big match and working at that venue as such a big fan?
Oh, that was probably the most nervous I've been in a long time, just because of the fact that that was my first match back after having the concussion. I didn't get to have any matches on the indies, any other things like that beforehand, so there was no real test of it. I think going into it, I was very nervous, but meeting EC3, which was also, it was gonna be a little bit nerve wracking, just because again, that's somebody I used to watch, and I was already a fan of seeing him in TNA in a lot of his big runs and high profile runs in TNA. So getting to work with this guy was a little bit nerve wracking, but it was also the idea that I had in the back of my head that, like, hey, what if I hit the back of my head and I get another concussion. So it was a lot of nerves going into that match, but overall, I think I was excited for the experience to just go ahead and get it out the way. Have that first match back, have that confirmation that I can still go, have that confirmation that this is not where my career ends. And, usually in those kind of situations, like a lot of people would try to bow out of getting thrown to the fire with this. That was the thing I was the most excited about. The same thing that made me super nervous, it made me, a little bit apprehensive, was the same thing that made me extremely excited to be there. And I thought it was an honor that the first match in the NWA that EC3 got to have was with me.
Yeah.
No matter the outcome, I was excited for that. I was excited for a new challenge, and I was excited that I could keep moving forward with my career. So I still look back at that match as one of my favorite matches just for that. It wasn't my favorite match for anything that happened in the ring, and I still enjoy exactly what happened in the ring. I think the match was perfect. I think the match was fine, yada yada. For especially for where I was at, and I think we did a hell of a job. But I'm going to remember it more for everything that happened right before then, for the thoughts that were going into it, the thoughts were happening while I was in the match, and the thoughts after the match. So I think it's still one of my best experiences. Definitely got to
That,
be in my top 10.
that's very cool. And he's somebody who he had an incredible run with TNA wrestling, and
Hmm.
I don't think enough can be said about is Ethan Carter the third phase in TNA. It was great. It was, and a great
Yeah.
theme song too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Trouble, 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 trouble. So much trouble. All
Well,
for
thank
one night.
you. Thank you so much for having this chat. One more time, let's hit the plugs. Where can people check you out? And I know you wanted to talk about the Love Alive charity for
Yes.
the Pope.
Yes. For the Pope. One of my still one of my current mentors when it comes to NWA anything. I definitely talk to him about a lot of things that are going on with me in the NWA and always get that sagely advice that he has. Uh um The Level Live charity is a charity he has down in Jacksonville, Florida, that he runs, and he is the man when it comes to that. If anything, a lot of it he is doing by himself. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hustling that goes into it, and this is part of his life's work. This is probably more important to him than his professional wrestling is. Even though, obviously, when it came to my fandom of Elijah Burke, the first thing that was important to me was his professional wrestling. Now I have something else to be a big fan of him for, not just for the way that he mentors me, but also for his selfless work with the Love Alive charity. So they're helping and feeding the homeless of Jacksonville, Tennessee, and they are trying to strive for people to have a better life. And with the Love Alive charity, uh, it's something that I see as a great step in a positive direction that I want to emulate myself. I want to be able to have my own charity and be able to help out the people around my community and around the world as much as possible. And that's one of the big things that I want to do with my professional wrestling career. It's not just about me with my professional wrestling career in the glory that I seek or the emotional reactions I seek. I want to use that platform to be able to give back, not just through my entertainment, but also through humanitarian efforts, kind of like exactly what Pope does. So with a Level Up charity, they're actually going to have a show. They're going to have a Duval Brawl 5 on January 14th, 2023. And they're also going to be handing out goods for the homeless and for those that are impoverished in that area of Jacksonville, Florida. And for me, I'm going to be there also, whether in a wrestling capacity or just sitting out there handing out blankets, handing out food, doing whatever I can to help out that same situation. I am planning to the best of my ability to be there too and help out with that. So if anybody wants to help out with the Love Alive charity and help your boy Mims or help your boy Pope, help your man Pope, help your fellow man in Jacksonville, Florida, you can donate to the Love Alive charity through I think it's just the lovealivecharity.com or .org, I'm sorry. And then also you can donate through Cash App, Venmo. I think they also have a PayPal too. All that information is on at the Love Alive charity on Instagram's page. You can find that through Pope's page, the Black Pope on Instagram. Also, I'm pretty sure it's the same thing on Twitter. You can find all the links for that there, and you can donate. Even $1 helps. $1 will help. I guarantee you it's going to help a lot more than you think it will. Even $1 will help. So I encourage anybody to donate. I donate my own money personally all the time, and I still continue to do so. And I still will throw my own money where my mouth is to help out with this charity because I know I not only believe in myself and I believe in the Pope, I also believe in this charity and I believe in his contributions to the rest of the world. So that's why I throw my own money that way.
And we'll have some
So,
links to their social media in the description of each video that we're posting. We'll probably have a select video just for this, just so people know to
mhm.
check it out. In the description, we'll have links to their social media in addition to your Twitter account and your TikTok, which are
So my social medias, everything for me
or
is usually
Instagram.
going to be under, at least for my Instagram, and then also for my Xbox Live Gamertag, because I love to play with people. I consider that another form of social media. We add really underscore Mims because it really is me. And then also for my TikTok, if I remember correctly, I think it's at Big Strong Mims NWA. I think that's me on TikTok. If not, I'm sure somebody's gonna correct me. But yeah, those are all my socials, all my handles. And soon I hope to, if I get further in my career and I get to do what I want to do with professional wrestling, eventually we'll be able to throw in the link to my charity to go help out others too.
Very, very cool. And that's a great
Mhm.
thing to do. Thank you so much for spending so much time with this interview. I'm really glad that we had a chance to chat and hear about your career and your mindset.
Yeah, of course. I love doing this, man. Anytime that you need me to be there, I will be there.
Awesome. And when you do get the charity going, of course, you can come on here to plug it. We will absolutely spread the news on that. Guys,
Of
thank you
course.
so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Armbars and Sidebars. We're also on Twitter at Armbars and Sidebars, or at Armbars Sidebar on Twitter, and on Instagram at Armbars and Sidebars. Make sure to subscribe, hit like, make sure to follow Big Strong Mims. He's very strong. You want to follow. And that's going to wrap things up. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Later.